In the vast tapestry of our diverse world, it is fascinating to observe how what may be good in one place can be bad in another. Just look at rainfall. In arid regions, plagued by drought and water scarcity, rain is undoubtedly considered a precious gift from the heavens. It brings relief, replenishing the parched land and nourishing crops and livestock. In such places, rain is celebrated and its scarcity is mourned. However, in regions where rainfall is abundant, such as areas prone to monsoons and tropical rainforests, an excess of rain can lead to disastrous consequences. Flooding, landslides, and the destruction of infrastructure become all too common, prompting residents to view rain with trepidation and even dread. This logic can also be applied to economic policy. Countries and societies are obviously different from each other, so it's natural for a certain type of policy to be good in one circumstance, but bad in another circumstance. In this video, we're going to take a look at how privatization can sometimes be a blessing, bringing in more efficiency, reducing budget deficits, and enhancing service quality, but when gone wrong, can be a disaster. In the 1970s, Great Britain was nicknamed as the sick man of Europe. That's because, although Britain did experience economic growth following the Second World War, it had very poor economic performances compared to its Western European counterparts. British industries suffered from low productivity and inefficiencies, and the country accumulated a substantial national debt, which put a strain on public finances and limited the government's ability to invest in economic development and social welfare programs. This was one of the reasons that led to the rise of Margaret Thatcher, a conservative leader who was about to revolutionize the British economy with massive free market reforms. Under the reign of Thatcher, over 50 major state companies were privatized. What characterized the way the privatization was done under Thatcher was that the government created a competitive atmosphere. For example, government companies that were privatized were often split to numerous competing branches. Also, alongside privatization, Thatcher's government introduced regulatory bodies and frameworks to promote competition and prevent anti-competitive behavior. Independent regulators were established to oversee and monitor the operations of privatized industries, ensuring fair practices and preventing the abuse of market power. In addition, Thatcher's government pursued policies of market liberalization, encouraging the entry of new competitors into previously monopolistic industries. This involved opening up sectors to new market players, removing barriers to entry, and promoting competition through deregulation. Privatization also often involved distributing shares to the public, aiming to foster a broad ownership base and prevent concentration of power in the hands of a few dominant shareholders. This was seen as a way to promote wider share ownership and limit the potential for private monopolistic control. This policy was nicknamed by Thatcher as popular capitalism. The benefits of this transformation from government-owned monopolies to private competitive markets cannot be put to justice by my little YouTube video. That's because in free and competitive markets, companies have to be efficient and create products that attract customers in order to get profits, and most importantly, not to go bankrupt. That's why after privatization was done, efficiency massively increased, customer services improved. A good example is the privatization of British Telecom between 1984 and 1991. Before privatization, British Telecom was a very inefficient government-run monopoly. It had a very bad bureaucracy, and it could have taken months of waiting time to make a call. However, after its privatization, waiting time massively decreased, and between 1984 and 1996, the cost of a 3-minute long-distance call decreased by 80%, and local call dropped by approximately 50%. Increased competition and technological advancement also led to improved call quality, faster internet speeds, and the introduction of value-added services. Successful privatizations don't geographically and historically end with Thatcher White Britain, of course. There are thousands of studies and countless of examples from all around the world, ranging from China to Britain to former Soviet countries like Estonia, which show that privatization improves efficiency, improves service quality, and drives more investments and development. Another benefit of privatization is fiscal relief. You see, when the government controls stuff, apart from usually giving more services in private competitive market, it also needs taxpayers' money, or debt, which is the taxpayer money for children with interest, to run its services, which could have stayed in the pockets of the citizens, or go into more urgent government services like education, security, or infrastructure. However, in the case of private companies, not only do they usually don't consume as much government budget like government-run stuff, they actually generate more revenue to the government through corporate taxes, something which helps to reduce government debt and deficits, allow lowering taxes, which improves the quality of life and drive economic growth. Also, it could open up more money to give welfare services like education or healthcare, something which debunks the claim that capitalism and free markets and welfare and helping the poor somehow contradict each other. In 1989, Boris Yeltsin, who back then was a prominent politician in the Soviet Union, visited a casual supermarket in Houston, Texas. Little did he knew that this visit was going to be remembered as the most important supermarket visit in history. In this visit, he was absolutely bamboozled by the sheer abundance that existed in the supermarket compared to the situation in the Soviet Union, which faced severe shortages of goods and poverty. In his memoir, he wrote, "When I saw the shelves crammed with thousands of cans, cartoons, and goods, every very impossible sort, for the first time I felt quite frankly sick with the despair of the Soviet people." This encounter with the American supermarket deeply influenced Yeltsin's perspective, helping solidify his view that a deep reform in the Soviet Union, which later became the Russian Federation, was needed. That's why it's not a shock that when Boris Yeltsin became the president of Russia, he did massive free market reforms, which included price liberalization, privatization, opening the country to imports and more. These reforms are often referred to as shock therapy due to the rapid and comprehensive nature of the changes implemented. However, contrary to many other places, such as other former Soviet bloc countries like Estonia and Poland, as well as China, in which free market reforms helped to improve the standard of living of people and lifted countless of people out of poverty and despair. The privatization which took place under Yeltsin's Russia didn't end very well. The problem was that contrary to the privatizations done under Margaret Thatcher, which we talked about earlier, the Russian government did not set the regulatory and legal framework to create a good competitive atmosphere through which these privatization plans would bring benefit to the Russian people. In fact, these privatizations led to a concentration of the Russian economy in the hands of a very small number of billionaire oligarchs, such as Boris Berezovsky, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, and Roman Abramovich. Estimates suggest that at their peak, these oligarchs and their associated business groups controlled a substantial portion of the Russian economy, if their combined wealth representing a significant percentage of the country's GDP. In the 1990s, the quality of life in Russia collapsed. According to World Bank data, the country's GDP declined by around 40% between 1991 and 1998. Inflation rate skyrocketed to an astonishing 2,520%. Life expectancy in Russia also experienced a sharp decline. According to World Bank data, life expectancy for both men and women fell from around 68 years in 1991 to as low as approximately 57 years for men and 71 years for women in 1994. This is why in the Russian public, this disastrous process was given nicknames such as grabization and kidlovo, from the word kidat, meaning to deceive or cheat, This term was often used to express the belief that the privatization process involved deception and fraudulent practices, with the government or powerful individuals taking advantage of the general public. Now the question is, what makes privatization in some places a blessing and in others a curse? And also, how should privatization ideally be done? This is for you if any policymakers are watching this video. Well, the answer is one word: competition. When you privatize and set the regulatory and market environment to replace the government-controlled monopoly with a vibrant, competitive free market, services and efficiency almost certainly will improve. That's because in a free and competitive market, if companies don't give the best services they can in the most efficient way they can, they will go bankrupt. However, if you replace the government-controlled monopoly with a private-controlled monopoly, not only the situation won't improve, but they will likely go worse for customers. That's because government-controlled industries have at least some accountability to the public, because the politicians controlling these services need to show results in order to get elected. However, in a private monopoly, the incentive is just to get profits and give services for as much money as possible with the least effort as possible. Now the second question is, why in some cases privatization ends up creating competition, and in other cases it just transforms government-controlled monopolies into private-controlled monopolies? Well, there are numerous answers for this. For example, in industries with high entry barriers, like utilities, such as electricity and water infrastructure, it's harder to create competition, because it's harder for new competitors to get in, and for the market to adapt, so you need to be more careful when you privatize it, compared to industries with low entry barriers, such as restaurants and freelance services. That's why even in Western countries, privatizations of stuff such as energy didn't always end well. A good example of this is the privatization of gas in Britain. Another cause of difference are the inherent institutional differences between countries. In the 2012 book, Why Nations Fails, economists Daron Acemoglu and James Robinson lay the theory of extractive versus inclusive institutions. To summarize, according to their theory, in some countries the political, social, and government institutions are inherently bent into protecting human and property rights and ensuring the fulfillment of the potential of the general population. This is what inclusive institutions are, and countries with these types of institutions also tend to be more prosperous. On the contrary, in some countries, the political, social, and governmental institutions are inherently bent into serving specific interest groups or an elite, and often oppress the general population and block their potential. This type of institutions are named extractive by Acemoglu and Robinson, and tend to have a lower quality of life. As you can guess, in countries with more inclusive institutions, like Britain, privatization is more likely to be done in a way that serves the general population, while in countries with more extractive institutions, like Russia, privatization is more likely to end up serving a small oligarchy on the expense of everyone else.